Okay, so FDR is the most important Democratic president ever? Yeah, I think I'm comfortable making that statement. You can quote me on that. In the same way that in the 1920s, Harding and Hoover set the Republican Party on its path toward laissez-faire economic policy and rugged individualism, FDR in the 1930s set up a Democratic coalition that was going to steer its party toward the more progressive liberalism that we see today. And he was incredibly popular. Essentially, almost everyone in the country liked and benefited from some aspect of FDR's New Deal. Except rich white guys. Their businesses became more regulated and they had to pay more taxes and provide more benefits for their workers. So they are going to become the heart of the modern Republican Party. But really, everyone else had some good reason to vote Democrat thanks to the New Deal. Working class white people benefited immensely from FDR's policies. Workers, including immigrants in the cities, got more power through labor unions, while farmers got support that brought them out of debt. Progressives were happy about the social safety nets that were built, like the Fair Labor Standards Act that finally abolished child labor. Ugh, all those kids were taking jobs away from unemployed adults. It also established the first minimum wage and a 44-hour work week. Intellectuals appreciated the philosophical shift to Keynesian economics, that's deficit spending, and the support for the arts and education. And Black Americans were included, in theory, in most of these New Deal support systems. And so this is the moment that we see most Black people finally abandoning the Republican Party of Lincoln to vote Democrat. I say Black Americans were included in the New Deal in theory because, of course, in practice, they were often excluded. Now, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt was a fierce advocate for equality and basic rights. I mean, she would go on to be the main author on the literal UN Declaration of Human Rights. Eleanor and other progressives pushed Franklin to make sure that historically marginalized Americans received the benefits of the New Deal. And when they were federally run programs, they mostly did, but a lot of the money and programs from the New Deal were run at the state or local level. So Jim Crow governments were given the ultimate power to administer these programs. And they made sure that their white constituents got the majority of the benefits. I mean, many banks explicitly advised their workers to not lend money to Black families or in Black neighborhoods. At the exact moment the federal government was stepping in to help a whole generation of Americans be homeowners, Black families were excluded. And think about it, owning a home and the land it sits on is one of the most secure investments you can make. It's going to create generational wealth for white families, while Black Americans have to sit and watch the opportunity go by, even more so in the post-World War II era, but we'll get there. Now, the beginning of the end of the New Deal came in 1936, when, after winning in a landslide re-election, FDR tried to use his power to intimidate the Supreme Court. You see, they had just struck down the Agricultural Adjustment Act that paid farmers not to farm, and they were eyeing two of his landmark acts, the Wagner Act, protecting labor unions, and the Social Security Act. FDR knew that these were some of the biggest pillars of his presidential legacy, and he wanted to do everything in his power to protect them. So FDR introduced a bill to Congress. Hey guys, the Supreme Court's pretty old, right? They should really retire when they turn 70. No more of this lifetime appointment stuff, am I right? Okay, what about this? For every Supreme Court justice who stays on after they turn 70, the president gets to appoint an additional justice to the Supreme Court. Sounds fair? What's that? Who would get to appoint the new justices? Whoever's the president, of course. Huh. I guess that would mean that I would immediately get to appoint 6 new justices to the Supreme Court. Huh, weird. I hadn't even thought about that. And scene. Anyway, this court packing plan did not go over well. It was clear that FDR was getting a little bit power hungry, and the public responded by handing over a lot of seats to Republicans in the 1938 midterm to check his power. But I mean, in some ways, FDR's intimidation maybe worked. The Supreme Court did uphold the Wagner and Social Security Acts, and most of his New Deal remained intact. Now, it's at this point that I would like to make a slightly controversial observation. Stick with me, we need some nuance here. We're not going to talk about it in depth until later episodes, but the 1930s were the decade of rising totalitarian governments, basically where one political party has total control. Stalin was grabbing control and using the Communist Party to reorganize the entire Soviet economy, and a guy named Hitler was tearing his way through the democratic process to gain more and more political power to advance his agenda. I mean, remember, his initial popularity came from his ability to reform and revive the German economy. It seems kind of crazy to think about this now, but at the time, there must have been those in the United States looking at FDR and wondering, is he doing the same thing? I mean, the Democratic Party was so dominant in the first half of the 1930s, they effectively could do whatever they wanted. And FDR was 100% taking more power for the executive branch than any president had ever done before him. This fear would be made even worse when FDR broke with tradition and ran for a third term in 1940, and then a fourth term in 1944. I want to be really clear. I am not at all putting FDR on the level with Stalin and Hitler for, I hope, obvious reasons. You know, not committing genocide being a very big one. But this was a big turning point in American political history after which big government became the answer to a lot of problems. Anyway, in hindsight, we know that he was not becoming a dictator in the ways that others were around the globe, but it was a reasonable fear that many had, especially conservatives at the time. Hell, a bunch of rich conservatives literally tried to overthrow FDR and instate a fascist government to bring the economy back under control. Like, go look up the business plot of 1933. It's wild. All right, so what is the legacy of the New Deal? Like, why is the New Deal such a big deal? Well, FDR changed the relationship with the American people and the federal government. For the first time in history, people began to look to the federal government to potentially solve daily problems they were facing, whether that was their housing situation, their job, or their bank account. And the federal government began to intervene in the economy and regulate industry significantly more than it ever had before. In a lot of ways, one through line of American history is the rise of the federal government, specifically the increasing power of the president. I mean, remember all the way back that the Articles of Confederation didn't even have a president, and it gave the federal government essentially no power. George Washington saw his role as mostly symbolic, and the founding fathers in general believed the executive would be the weakest of the three branches. Andrew Jackson expanded presidential power, but mostly by just straight up ignoring the Constitution. But in times of extreme crisis, like with Lincoln during the Civil War, or now FDR in the Great Depression, the president became an important leader who took drastic measures to solve the crisis. So our modern relationship with the government was really established during the 1930s, and it would continue to expand. In FDR's day, most Americans still see the federal government's realm as specifically economic issues, but later on, during another decade of crisis, the 1960s, its role is going to expand even more into social issues. Now, love him or not, FDR was the most prolific president in history. I mean, he passed 77 pieces of legislation in his first 100 days as president. But of course, the New Deal was just the domestic side of his presidency. And in fact, the New Deal wasn't really the thing that got us out of the Depression. In my opinion, it stopped the bleeding, and it set up measures to prevent something like it from happening again. But what really pulled us out of the 1930s and shot us into the spotlight as the most powerful economy in the world was World War II. That's right. FDR is not satisfied with just drastically reorganizing almost every aspect of socioeconomic policy at home. He also wants to save the world. Now that I'm saying it out loud, he might have a slight God complex. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe and join patreon.com/antisocialstudies.